You can characterize the tissue, at least in the main arteries with MRI. You are in a fantastic platform to begin to apply drugs. And we began, as you probably know, by looking at carotids and aortas with some fat here in black, and we began to give simvastatin 20 versus 80 milligrams in 50 patients. And what we saw in that study, and this has been reproduced by the group at Hopkins with transesophageal MRI, is that after 6 to 12 months of giving a statin, the arteries shrink and the fat goes away. And the mechanism is quite fascinating. It seems the fat goes away through the back door, through the vasa vasorum. They probably have a role to take the fat out, and when you lower LDL by a gradient of concentration, it goes away. But that's basically what we found. What is interesting in that study is that if the LDL got below 100, the regression of the disease was much more significant than if the LDL was more than 100. And this really goes along with what was found in the PROVE-IT TIMI-22 and reversal trial, when atorvastatin, that lower LDL much more than pravastatin, was much more successful in the regression and stabilization of the disease by ultravascular ultrasound or by or clinically. And this is the second example that was published with the Japanese group about maybe 2 weeks ago. And this is the work done with atorvastatin rather than simvastatin. And it's fascinating. It really takes into account the technology I am mentioning to you, but I'd like to show you the power of this technology. Here's a situation where you give atorvastatin 5 milligrams or atorvastatin 20 milligrams. And more is the decrease of LDL, more significantly is the decrease of atherosclerotic disease burden over a 12-month period. So you have visually, you see exactly what goes on, and you can correlate. And I think this is beautiful. In other words, you're really dealing now with what goes on in the vessel wall. This was much better in the thoracic aorta than in the abdominal aorta. And I have some constraints of time, so I prefer to move on rather than giving examples. But it's just to point out to you that we are now closer to making an impact by understanding better how this disease develops and what can make the disease to regress that you can visually see directly. These are all the studies we have done with HDL, and summarizing the slide are 5 studies. When you enhance HDL in an animal model, either you increase it or you make it more active, there is regression of the atherosclerotic process, which goes much faster than when you give statins. And the point is, the fat in the macrophage, which is what HDL takes care of, goes out very rapidly. And the regression of the disease may take 5 to 6 weeks, just with HDL raising, compared with a statin that it takes about a year to begin to see the difference. And in a statin is extracellular fat. I only want to point out this to you because now, with these technologies I am showing to you, we're going to use a molecule which has been very successful in the animal model and is a PPAR which has 3 components. One that enhances HDL, another is anti-inflammatory component, and the other one is anti-diabetic. And I just want to point out this to you, that this is going to be used again in this study, in which this technology that I'm showing is going to be, now we are going to be addressing not only the LDL component, extracellular component, but the macrophage component of fat, which PPAR, and I think enhancing HDL. And all of this will be addressed by imaging technology. Now, I only wanted to present this aspect to you, and that is this technology not only tells you whether there is disease, but what can you do about it? What are the new drugs that we have available? And I presented to you this molecule of PPAR that we will be able to address very rapidly with technology like this. And this leads to the last comment on this, which is a patient who is a very highly risky patient, but now we want to look at the disease rather than by density, as I showed to you now with MR. It's like you do immunofluorescence. And basically the principle is this. You have fat, statins work here, you have macrophages, you have clots, you have vasa vasorum. Can you identify these molecules and begin to use treatments in your patients? This is not animal, but in your patients that may tell you what you are doing. And the concept is simple. It's the concept that You have a molecule you want to identify, LDL, for example, or fibrin, and you have an antibody or a peptide, and you have a transporter, and then here you have the iron with the transporter, and you inject this, and the iron identifies, if by MRI, how many of those molecules are present. And this is data obtained in the rabbit model. Look how nice. This is like immunofluorescence of the aorta where the LDL has been deposited. This is a combination of macrophages and HDL without going into too much detail, also in an animal model, in an artery which is actually 1 millimeter. And this is actually the injection of iron particles which go into macrophages, and this is the identification of a 1 millimeter blood clot in the carotid artery of the rabbit by the same mechanism. This is what we call molecular MR. And you're saying, so what? Now we are going to patients with all of this. And we are going again to the FREEDOM trial. And we are going to address peripheral vascular disease like you do immunofluorescence, to see all the components of the plaques. And this is the study. And actually it's going to be done in sequence. All the things I presented to you are going to be injected in sequence, and looking at the legs of patients where you can identify these components and begin to use new ways of therapy. This is what we call molecular MR, and it's quite exciting. So what I have done in the high-risk population is, frankly, we have to understand this population better. And we have to see new drugs that affect the disease. And this is what I was really trying to convey to you. These are individuals who do not have disease yet, but new technologies will tell us the burden of disease and will allow us to address new treatments, new approaches, and new understanding of the disease by itself. Now, in your map, you have calcification and CRP as one of the aspects, particularly calcification in the beginning of the screen. I want to address this briefly in the intermediate risk patient. The high risk, to me, is a research tool, and that's what I wanted to present to you. Burden of disease, better understanding of disease, better treatments, see what we affect with these treatments. We are here on an intermediate risk population at Framingham, which means the number of events is about 5 to 20% over a 10-year period once you do the Framingham score, which is here. The problem with intermediate risk patient is that you cannot predict whether it's intermediate or not. You have the score, you put it here, you follow the patient for 10 years, and you find that you have been wrong many times. So the intermediate risk patient is very troublesome because many are high risk and many are low risk. It means the risk factor profile is pretty variable. And this is where I think that things like the calcification, the degree of calcification of the coronary arteries adds to the Framingham, is making that particular intermediate risk either mild or severe according to the degree of calcification. I'm just presenting this to you because you have the calcification is 0 or no 0, which is fine. It's a way to start, but at least the way I see calcification is there is a different gradients of calcification which really you can attach to Framingham. And the same happens with CRP. When you really look at CRP carefully, is how much CRP is there, make a patient that is moderately in Framingham is intermediate, making it high risk, or a patient that has a very low CRP, making it a very low risk. And this is the way I see these tests actually, more of adding to the risk factor profile. I'd like to go and actually finish into what I consider today is our challenge. And our challenge is in the low risk population, whether you like it or not. Because we call today low risk this 40-year-old who's doing very well and probably is moving into a high risk very rapidly, and we don't have any idea that he's getting there. This is the population we are dealing with, very, very prevalent in this country. Is what we call a low-risk population. You do Framingham, and this is the individual, maybe over age of 40, that has one single risk factor. Or maybe under age of 40 has a couple of risk factors. And the question is, you call this low risk because the incidence of events is about less than 5% in 10 years. To me, the whole epidemic is evolving in this layer. And therefore, it's hard to say we are not interested. Because if you study obesity and the metabolic syndrome, what has evolved in the last 15 years, there is no question comes from the bottom layer up. Therefore, if we don't attack that layer vigorously, I don't think we are going to have a great success in the prevention of the epidemic. That's why I'm emphasizing that aspect. And I have few comments to make. Actually, I have 3 comments to make. First, this is the layer of the government up there. And that is, if we go to our government and we say, you know, if the population of this country decrease or stop smoking, we would decrease 50% coronary events. Like in East Finland, the government changed the diet and they dropped cholesterol by 10%, 30% less coronary events at 15 years of follow-up. Diastolic pressure, a drop of 6 millimeters of mercury, 42% decrease in stroke and 16% of CHD. And that to me is the challenge that we have. You mentioned cancer, they are we do mammography and so forth, yes, but you see, cancer you have it or you don't, but we are dealing here with a progression of disease, and the governments are less interested to see something that is very long in the future, that is during their tenure. But the realities are that this is the data that can make a difference. So this is number one. This has to be a priority on the health systems of a given country. The second issue I want to mention, which it looks funny but is not so funny when you think about it, is the so-called polymeal. All these are all the studies done recently, which are prospective studies using different types of milk, Mediterranean diet and so forth. And what the studies show when you pull them together, that if you eat what is here, including wine, and maybe you might not smell too well because it's garlic, but if you eat this is what people used to eat more than 100 years ago. This is not absolutely unique. The thing is we are eating differently. You could decrease the incidence of events by, they say, by 76%, whatever. But the fact of the matter is there is one point here, and that is this is a disease that we have acquired in a society of consumption. Therefore, we can have all the maps of prevention, but if we don't go from the top, from the government, into changing things, I don't think we will get too far. Things I would do, first, I would penalize restaurants that serve you portions that are double than what should be. And you said, this affects the freedom of people. I will tell you an example. If you go to the road and you don't have green lights and yellow lights and green lights, this affects your freedom? It doesn't. You need that. The problem is we are creating a disease in an incredible way, and we can do any map we can say in prevention, but if this doesn't come from the top and we really change things that are in the culture, I personally think is not going to go anywhere, because we are talking on the bottom layer. And this leads to my final comment on the bottom, which has to do with children. This study has been very criticized, which is an NIH study completely focused on children, and particularly on the mothers that are pregnant even before the children are born. And the whole project, which is $2.7 billion, is to really understand what happened to these children and their environment that make them to develop disease in a later stage. I will say to you that to me is critical. You know, it's funny, but I'm working now with Sesame Street. This is you might know what Sesame Street is, that they hired me as an advisor. And I'm working with them, and actually the project I'm working is quite fascinating, is to teach the 6 to 9 year olds the importance of nutrition and the importance of not using drugs and so forth. But they are not at that age, they don't use them. But it's the only age that you capture, that you remember, and then when the time comes, you remember what happened in age 6 to 9. That's what I learned from the psychologists of Sesame Street. And the project is to go to the 15 to 20 year olds who are the role models of these kids, to teach them, you invigorate these people at that age that is so vulnerable, and then they teach the kids who are their role models into what I'm discussing. This is what I call innovation. And we are starting with 3 institutions in this country, schools, in Venezuela and in Brazil. And the whole issue is to, in the same school, how we can begin to change things, because if we don't go to the bottom of all these layers, I don't think we will go too far. So these are the comments I wanted to make. I'd like to finish by, I was asked to provide my view of the organization and the document that you are describing here. And I will, very frankly, will present to you my view. First of all, I personally think that this is innovative. So I'm talking here today because of that. I think this is a good organization that tries to do new things. And I think that's great. I would say to you that questions I have, these are no more than comments. Is this whole tree feasible? Because if you start with just the screening with imaging, this is going to be pretty tough when you go to a broad population. And if you don't start with the risk factors. Again, I'm presenting you questions. There's nothing else than that. The second issue is, as you move from the top to the bottom, things get very complex. Are you simple enough? I would keep simplicity, and I want to tell you, give the freedom to the doctor to work on the bottom. Don't start saying, measure this, measure that, because it reminds me to that tree that says elective surgery in patients with coronary disease. Kim Eagle did a good job, but if you look at the number of boxes are 75, and there is no way that you can get into 75 boxes and at the end say what to do with the patient. Has to be conceptually. So I would keep the bottom pretty simple and for the freedom of the physician. The thing that I missed there is some of what I try to portray to you today, that we have to really have in mind prevention, management, action. Because if you just stay into identification, you are getting very short. And again, I'm not criticizing because you're innovative, it's just a comment. I was asked to comment on that. The final issue is, maybe there are too many authors there, poly-author. You know, I think maybe 22 people contributed very much. Put the 22, I'm not debating that. But there are people who read and put the name and they leave. These attempts against credibility, I have to tell you, in the world of science. And that is, when you have so many people, you really feel, well, you know, I am not sure this is credible. And again, is a comment. And I would say, you know how many people contributed to this document. And again, I have to congratulate you because you are trying to do something which is quite innovative. And I just present to you these last comments. Well, look, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I presented to you a point of view on a huge issue, which is a disease that is actually doubling, despite that we go out and says everything is going fine. In fact, it's not going so fine. And that is, we are prolonging life, but we are not preventing the disease. And this is the reality of what is happening today. Thank you very much.